Hello YouTube, Shroomies, welcome to the channel. In this video, we are going to go into some deep analysis about the damage formula in the game and how you can use this knowledge to help you with your builds, how to min-max your damage for both PvP and PvE. I hope you found this interesting and really useful, and I'll try not to kill you and bore you with excessive amount of math. But end of the day, in this game, a lot of aspects of the damage is purely multiplicative. There are portions of it that are additive, or really looking at some very basic calculations here. So if we think about our damage, just like our stats, is built into three parts. There is the interaction around the very base part of the formula, which is all about your attack and your enemy's defense, which is crucial because this basically tells us if the enemy has higher defense than your attack, you're screwed. You're going to do 1 damage to them, and that is the end for you. So whatever you do, make sure you really prioritize your attack stat if you want to do damage to your enemy, because if their defense is higher than you, you are screwed. Or if you want to have, the best defense is the good offense, then build a very tanky class, like a tanky prophet, where your defense and you have mechanism to reduce the enemy's attack to a point where you are going to be having higher defense than the enemy's attack. They're not going to be doing any damage to you while you slowly kill them and grind them to death, right? That is basically how this part of the formula works. Then the next part is understanding the 5 different damage type, right? We have the basic attacks, we have the combo attack, we have the combos more for the archers, counters for the warriors, mages have skill damage, and of course POW have POW damage. If you're noting here, then your basic attack really is just your basic attack damage multiplied by your crit damage divided by the enemy crit resistance. So here, to simplify things, I've actually taken off all my gear, and all I really have here is, if you look at the stats, I don't have any crit rate, so all we're going to see is combo damage on the screen, we're going to see some skill damage on the screen, and we're going to see some basic attack. So here, looking very carefully, that 5-digit number, 592 million, is my basic. That 4-digit, 5172, is my combo. And if you look at the delayed skill hit at the back, 12166 million is actually the skill damage. And you can quickly validate that by multiplying the basic multiplier of close to 14,000. So 14 times my final attack here. Just for a quick calculation, 425, and we times 12 points. I think that was the number, or somewhere close to that. Sorry, times 13.16 is the multiplier, and you can see that. Sorry, that was counter. My mistake there. 132.82, and we had my damage earlier. So there you go. 519. That 512 rounded up slightly. That was the million, right? So this is in thousands, rounded up to million. And then our combo damage is roughly 10 times more of that, right? Because my combo multiplier is almost 10 times of my basic multiplier. So that's where we see the 5172. All right. And of course, skill damage, this is where the huge multiplier you see in the actual class skill takes place. So here, this is the multiplier against my attack times the skill-based damage times the skill damage multiplier of 2.76 here. And if I had a more skill crit, that would be multiplied on the skill crit damage on top of that as well. So this also tells us a few interesting facts. One, for your basic mobs here, actually they have 0 defense. The same is actually true for the boss as well. When you go into the boss fight for each of the waves, they actually also don't have any defense as well. However, crit resistance, everybody starts out with 100% crit resistance. So that even POWs like, for example, here I have, where is it? So for example, for a back item that I have, right? So for example, Lord of Light, I'm reducing the enemy crit resistance by 10% after the start of the battle. This straight up is going to allow me to do 10% extra damage if all my damage is crit, right? Because this crit resistance, instead of being 100, goes down to 90, and I'm going to be now doing basically effectively 10% more damage. Likewise, and I'm, I guess, missing out on the wedding for while I do this recording here. Likewise, right, if you happen to be around on one of the events wearing one of these POWs, that's why the snake POW that was released around, I think, January this year, the Serpent Spring, that is 8% extra damage right there, right, on a crit based build, because you're going to be doing a lot of crit, and those crit are going to do 8% more. So combining that, you're going to be doing that's a very good multiplicative effect by having that POW in your lineup. So hopefully this kind of explains that part of the ratio. But then this becomes a very important discussion in PvP, because in PvP now the enemy do have crit resistance, and it's super important for you to have a good amount of crit resistance, because the ratio of your crit damage against the enemy crit resistance is going to be key to how much critical damage you're going to be taking. So if they have no crit resistance, they're going to be taking 15% damage whenever I crit. Now, of course, here, with a ratio like this, if my enemy had 400, well, then they're only taking, 4 times the crit resistance. Now, around my level, most people are going to be around 5,000 to 6,000 crit damage. So that's 60 times if you don't have any crit resistance. You probably want yourself in then the anywhere between the 1,500 range to 2,000 range-ish, because that kind of gets to a diminishing return, right? Like if you have a ton of crit resistance, but the enemy doesn't have a lot of crit damage, then your crit resistance is not really going to help protect you much. The more crit damage the enemy has, the more effective return you get out of adding your crit resistance. So just look at your enemies around your bracket, how much crit damage they have. You want to get that ratio to maybe down to about anywhere between 2 to 3, and that'll be really effective. And this means a lot of time, for example, in your enchants. Over here, you can see that for my 2 sets. One of my sets over here, I'm running a full crit damage piece, but for my PvP set, I'm actually working on getting a level 20 crit damage resistance piece, which is going to be a huge help and making my fights a lot more consistent, so we're not just one-shotting each other. And a lot of the time, if your enemy is putting a lot of stats into crit and very little in crit resistance, you're going to be at a huge advantage by building in that extra crit resistance. And it is not. Some people might think it's actually crit damage minus crit resistance and feel like, oh, I'm investing the same into both, I might as well just get more crit damage. No, it is not. It is actually a ratio here, and that's super important to remember. So that's why you get diminishing return for adding any stat into here. So this comes back down to a very important question, right? Because when there are 2 parts in the game where both in your souls as well as for your awakening scrolls, right? At first, once you get to level 9, every level is going to take 10, right? And then it's going to go to 25 between 10 to 30. And if you go past 35, it's going to cost you 30 per. And keep on stacking all of your scroll into one particular stat gets very costly as opposed to actually spreading it out. And it's free to reset this. So you can have like a tanky build where, for example, I can actually put a whole bunch of defense in here for PVE content, for example, where I make sure I can actually survive the Snowland boss, for example, right? And for another build, I can actually optimize like in my waves, right? So for example, my regular wave content, right? Where I'm pushing on maximize my progression here on my soul. And you can see this is where, all of your min-maxing come into play. I am definitely not the biggest whale, and we have merged once now, right? If you look at your soul trials, I'm actually ranked number 1 against a much stronger archer here with way more attack, and also here with the Beast Roar Bowl as well. I managed to squeeze myself right to the top, very top of the campaign. Don't do that. That is actually not a very good idea, because now it is a pain in the butt for me to kill any of waves to even do the weekly events here. I'll put all my gear on near the end of the video to showcase a little bit in PvP in terms of the difference that it makes, and hopefully we can tell a little bit of a difference there. But other than that, right, like we got here, let's see. This is also why, skill damage wise, because you don't have a lot of ways to mitigate it, the way we can mitigate damage with crew resistance, pre-blitz builds are so deadly early to mid-game, where the only way to reduce damage taken from skill damage is actually through the damage resistance type, skill damage resistance. So here, if we're looking at our talent, right, and it would be mid-delay games when players start to actually be able to invest into things like skill damage resistance, right? And you really want to then think about here also on your enchant, because you can only pick one, right? I'm pretty sure there is also, the option of putting skill damage resistance as your main stat, but for the most part, they do definitely show up on your substats. And this is where you kind of see the damage shredding capabilities vary by class. If you notice here, both warrior and the archer, they actually start by an active skill that allows you to do 8 seconds shredding any counter damage resistance that I have. But when we look at the PAL class or the mage class, they can only shred 20% of the target's skill damage resistance. So it's far more effective for you to actually build skill damage resistance and PAL damage resistance, because you're not going to be losing that shred. Because for every point, right, we saw earlier on our talents, every point is the same on our talent, right? Here you can see I was, testing against someone for skill damage, and this is super effective. However, when I'm fighting someone by stacking a ton of combo resistance, is not going to be that effective, because they're going to be shredding away 40, like minusing 40 of that at the start. And, that's why building combo resistance is not going to help me. It's not going to be as effective as if I try to stack a little bit of skill damage resistance, because there's less of it to be shredded away in that fight. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Let's talk a little about overall damage resistance, and you can build overall damage resistance with this relic. And this is actually really effective the higher you're able to stack this particular stat. Basically, you can, you use the deer pet and you use this, and you're already at 21 in my case. There are, of course, mounts and artifacts and all the pay to win stuff that can increase it a little bit further. And of course, there's talent, I believe, that can increase it. For example, in the warrior class, this is where interactions come into play against things like smoke bomb, right? Smoke bomb is a great skill, because if we actually pay attention really slowly here, immediately, right, all my damage went up by 20%. And that's because this 20%, the way it works here is it's really just making my enemy taking 25% damage. And smoke bomb, unlike the main primary skill set, there is no delay in casting. So there are certain skills in this game that almost have like an instant cast, while for some other skills, there's a slight delay for it to actually take effect. And, I'll go into details about that in, future nuanced details about PvP. So make sure you like and subscribe if you want to, catch all of that detail, all that game knowledge that will help you excel against your opponents. So here, I'm also going to add an avian here. So, a lot of people like to prefer to use Midnight Firefly. In my playthroughs, I actually use Michelle a lot, because I believe early to mid-game, Michelle is incredibly helpful because of that stun, allowing you to survive content longer. And, the more you stay alive, the more damage you do. But at some point, your defense is going to be so high that you're not going to have trouble with any of the enemies. So then you definitely want to, at that point, switch over to the Midnight Firefly, because this straight up is going to give you 15% extra damage. Now, this is where testing is more important than actually just reading, because skill description sometimes is misleading. Because for the longest time, I actually believed that it was only one target, like whoever, for example, because here it says, right, it's going to deal 6,000 damage, combo damage, or whatever, at the beginning, at the battle start, right, deals current attack, right, to the target. I thought it was one target, but But no, it's basically everything on your screen. Anybody you're hitting is your target. So everybody for that 5 seconds they're taking 15% more damage. This 15 is not multiplicative against the smoke bombs. It's actually additive. So if we actually look at the number on the screen, and if you pause and remember the number we saw earlier, here we're actually looking at 35% extra damage. So for example, that 801, right? 801 divided by our 892 earlier, we are just a little bit over that. And the main reason, because I do have a little bit of extra affixes here, shroom combo and rage bonus increasing my crit damage. I have a little bit more over here on, but we're talking about basic damage, right? So there's a little bit more that's coming from, you know, it's not exactly perfect math, but the target's damage resistance is reduced further by that 15%. So there you go. So yeah, the damage is increased by 35% there combining. It's not purely multiplicative. It is more closer to additive ratio. We just need to look for that. Oh, it's actually, sorry, my bad. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's 800. But it's, anyways, it's close enough. Like just ignore the rounding there. Okay. With that out of the way, you know, we understood the overall damage. But if I actually so if it was a PvP situation, however, because I have some initial damage resistance, that will actually be subtracted away. So for example, here, I actually started out with a damage resistance of 21%, right? If they casted, a smoke bomb on me, the damage taken then will be 0.99 versus 0.99 divided by 0.79. And I'll be taking basically 25% more damage as a result of smoke bomb. So this is where you can see, you know, smoke bomb is incredibly helpful. It's probably one of the best damage amplifying toolkit in your entire toolbox of damage amplifying spells. It's going to increase all damage type taken, right? So you saw here, not only skips skill damage, basic attack damage, combo damage, all damage type benefit from smoke bomb. That's why it is such a great skill to use. All right, I hope this video has been really helpful for you. I know I rambled on for 17 minutes already. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave in the comment and details below. I'll end the fight a little bit here, going to my PvP setup here, just showing you very briefly, right? And the reason why logic for this. So things like Easy Breezy actually cast at the beginning of the battle right away. So the enemy is taking, has less attack immediately for whatever subsequent skill they're casting for you. And here we are going to, compare the results here in terms of my fights. If we look at our enchants here, at this time, we're going to start the battle and change it. Sorry, we're going to change this to our first set, which is actually just one difference, where you can see I have a lot less crit resistance. Right, and you can see I am gonna have a awful time fighting the. I hope Pazu has her PvP on. Let's see. Or at least have a cheetah on. And by the look like it looks like it's PvP. Yeah, Blitz is definitely there. Okay, so you can see I'm getting killed very quick in this particular fight, right? Let's show what the difference is with crit resistance there now. And with crit resistance, I'm going to just last a little bit longer. And as a result, I'm actually going to make this fight look that much closer. Because she basically beat me by almost a full second there on the fight. And here with more crit resistance, we're going to hopefully last just a tiny little bit longer. I'm not sure if it's notable enough here. So again, of course, I do a little bit less damage, but you can see how much longer, right? How much more I survive. If she took like 2 or 3 extra more hits to knock me out. And often if I think about our ratio here, right? If we think about our 2 ratio in 2 different situations here, obviously my crit resistance needs to be a lot higher, and I can probably get that up a lot higher. And without sacrificing too much crit damage, I can probably get this up so that right now, the ratio, if you saw before, right? She would have been doing 6, so it was around, I think, 700. So that means she would have been doing like about more than 9 times her basic damage every time she crits. And I would only be doing close to, maybe it would be 5,000 versus 8, so maybe about a ratio of 7. However, by switching this to crit resistance, our ratio in terms of crit damage effect is much closer. So I believe, if I get this a little bit higher, and, of course, there's a massive difference here on attack and defense that cannot be made up. But at least I can bring the fight a lot closer. And of course, for example, in sailing or parking lot, a little bit of debuff difference could help make up for some of that gap there. So I hope you find this really helpful in terms of showcasing, how your build. This is why it's super important to build crit resistance, because not only it works well against archers, it's going to work well against your warrior class as well as your pal class. So definitely in PVE, of course, you want to build crit damage, but make sure you have crit resistance built up for a lot of your PvP content. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Gandolf out.